Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share, subscribe, thank the channel. We need your support. And as ever, we're bringing you the best guests, the people who speak the truth, those who are unafraid of the system and its propaganda and its desire to cancel voices which give counter-political truths. Today's no different. I have with me Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
It's great to be with you.
Head of the 21st Century Wire and intrepid reporter. These days I see you around the world traveling, and the latest journey you had was an astounding piece of journalism as well, because I was watching a lot of what you put out there, and because of the scale of what you were witnessing in the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei. And you know that old adage, the king is dead, long live the king. It struck me that a Khamenei was passing, and it was the end of an era, and a Khamenei was arriving, the beginning of a new era. And I wanted to really first get your views on what you saw out there, what the feeling was, the kind of emotions amongst the people of Iran, because here we were fed a lot of propaganda. I can only call it propaganda, to say that actually the Iranian people hated Ayatollah Khamenei, that the regime was some sort of oppressive force which was imposed upon the people. They discriminated against women, and they were some sort of medieval mullah-led outfit that was really just building a nuclear bomb that was going to destroy the whole world. This was pretty much the narrative in summary. But your experiences out there, what you witnessed, would be really interesting first.
Yeah, I can only say it was extraordinary. It was the sort of thing that I knew that this was going to be a historic event, really important event. And I only had accreditation, press accreditation at the very last minute, hours, in fact, before I was due to confirm my seat on the last flight, the last seat on the last flight available. And I was very lucky to have all of that come together. But I knew I had to be there to witness that for myself, having previously traveled to Iran in February, right before the war, 2 weeks before the bombs dropped in February. And that was for a very similar reason, in that I really wanted to witness and see what the relationship in terms of public support was with the government and the supreme leader, because they were demonizing the Iranian government back in January and February. Wild claims of that the regime killed 40,000 or 50,000 or 70,000 protesters. The number kept growing every week. And the President of the United States still parrots those claims. Just this last week, he said the same thing. They've killed 50,000 of their people. It's a brutal regime and so forth. So I had to go to investigate that for myself, gather as much facts, and I was able to do that. And I have a very definitive, clear picture of what happened during the protests and riots. But it was important because that was being used as the sort of moral justification from the Western point of view of why this was a just war against Iran. I mean, they had a number of different stories that they were concurrently running. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. This is a brutal regime. They're stealing from their own people. The IRGC is stealing all the food and hoarding the food. So anyway, there's all of these different myths that are generated by the West and Israel and the Israeli lobby, and for one purpose, which is to delegitimize the government and the state, and to provide some kind of a public support of backing, if you will, for military action against Iran. And what's interesting is, so during the funeral, I'll just start what was one of the things that struck me, is kept being told by the Trump administration that they're starving, the Iranians are starving. In Tehran, on Monday, that was the final day in Tehran, and there were, at the low end, 8 million people by, let's say, lunchtime. And those numbers, 15 million in Tehran, if you count the Grand Masala on Saturday and Sunday, that's the Grand Mosque for the Imam Khomeini, and the people that came out for that, plus the Monday funeral procession. Financial Times admitted upwards of 15 million. The population of Tehran is only 12. So this is significant. And I saw more food being given away on the street, free everywhere. Free food, fresh fruits and vegetables, popsicles, drinks, people giving out food. And much like you have in Karbala, the march and to Najaf during that very important Shiite event where people just give charity and are there. So what I found from this, plus my previous trips to Iran, the Iranian people, and I really did not fully understand this, that they don't need to have their arm twisted. When it's time to step up, everyone just seems to know what to do. And everything just clicks into place. Logistically, this was a funeral over 6 days across the country, and not only in Iran, but in Iraq as well. They took the body of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, to Najaf and to and Karbala, and did that end of the tour before.
The whole sacred, holy sites.
All of
it. Yeah, especially.
And millions more coming from Iraq to attend that. Then afterwards, the final destination was Mashhad, the holy city of Mashhad. And that is the home city, if you will, of the supreme leader. This is where he spent a lot of his formative years, and also intellectually during the revolution. It was a very important story there. So that was his final resting place. And it wasn't just the supreme leader. It was members of his family that were killed alongside him, including 14 or 18-month-old young girl, his granddaughter, I think.
Yes.
That's, that for the nation, you could say martyrdom in Iran, and everybody knows what that means. You say that in the West, I don't think people quite understand what that concept means, but it means something a lot different even in Iran, because it is the nation of Imam Hussein. It is, that story of fighting against the oppressor. It's very important. It's instructive of Shia Islam. It's informative. It is really, I think, you could say, the moral foundation for the faith in the center of politics in post-revolution Iran. It's very, very important. And the supreme leader, the amount of people that came out in response, I mean, you're talking about half the population, 40 million people, upwards of, if not more than, but that's nearly half the population of a country of 90 million. That's extraordinary. Put this funeral aside in Tehran, but in all the other locations, half the population participating in a state funeral in some way, shape, or form over a week, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, you were comparing it to the Queen Mother here, or Lady Diana's, or Princess Diana's funerals in Britain, and that tells you the scale. They were like, 1 million people at the most, I guess?
Something like that. But then the Western narrative will be, and I got attacked on social media after I was standing on the street filming and talking to Iranians and an American, okay? My country is literally bombing them as we speak. And so, I didn't have any security around me or anything like that. I'm very much exposed. But I'm standing on there and I'm getting attacked by, trolls of various shapes and sizes, many of them MAGA, or you could say Israeli, who knows who they're working for, royalists on X and so forth, saying, you're not talking to the millions of people that they're forced by the regime to go out and protest. So, and they said the fact that you haven't been hung in Iran means that you're a propagandist for the regime because I'm still alive, which is kind of ridiculous. But it's incredible. So I think in the West, it's this idea that, the Basij are doing door-to-door searches in Tehran to make sure everybody gets out for the parade. It's just utterly ridiculous. But this is the kind of Walt Disney level, I like to call it the Aladdin characterization, animated Disney level that the Western politicians and media engage in when it comes to, this is the most, and I believe after, a couple of visits to this country, especially this time, seeing the media coverage versus the reality, this is the most demonized country This is the most dehumanized population. And this is the most caricaturized, cartoon caricaturized leader in world history, at least in terms of modern media. I can't think of it. If you read the writings of the supreme leader, you listen to his speeches, and you realize that this is the godfather of two generations. And he is a poet. He is a literary scholar. He is an expert in Western literature. And I saw his library in his house, or his former house in Mashhad. Yeah. And sadly, probably a lot of his own personal library was destroyed when he was assassinated by the United States and Israel on February 28th. He is a spiritual leader, so the equivalent of the Pope of Shia Islam. That doesn't just end with Iran, but that extends globally to the global Shiite population. A political leader, policy leader, a commander-in-chief of the military, all rolled into one. Yeah. You know, and to see all of the people out, the passion, I have never seen. I mean, I've been to Pope visits in America, and those are big, where you have to literally get there the day before and sleep overnight in a field to get a glimpse of the Pope Mobile and hear the speech, Pope John Paul II,
sure,
in the 1980s. And I've been to the biggest anti-war demonstrations in the world. I have been to some of the biggest demonstrations, even in Iran. I was at one of the biggest in February at that time. But I've never seen the solidarity, the galvanization of a people that is almost like, it was electric, but not just in mourning, it was in defiance as well. So
calls for revenge.
I mean, not just disparate calls, but like you see elderly women carrying signs that say hashtag KILL Trump. Mm. And this isn't just an isolated thing. This is everywhere. And so, and you know, we will avenge our leader. That's a mainstream position in Iran. Mm. And, you know, this can't be ignored. So I think the press club in Tehran invited us to come, and we did some interviews there, and we met some journalists, young journalists. And there was many of us from, you know, I was from the U.S., Lebanon, other Middle Eastern countries, some Europeans, and we had journalists from Pakistan, from Kashmir, from different places, from Iraq. And they asked me to write a headline. Say, if I was to write a headline today, we had to write it on the wall, what would the headline be? And it was a kind of an impromptu question. And I just said, okay, a nation mourns, and rises. Because what came with this, and this is the thing, see, when you're on the ground at the event, there's things that you notice that you would never see. And one of them is, because I was with Iranians, I would always be able to ask questions, translate that in Farsi for me. What does that say? I kept seeing the same banner in Arabic, as well as in Farsi and in English. And it was the fist of the leader, yes, with his iconic ring, and then the robe, a fraying robe, mind you,
yes,
because he kept his old garments, which were fraying on the edges. But that was the last image of his hand in the rubble, according to his son, I believe, Mojtaba Khamenei, is that, and so the writing says, we must rise. So that's the message, right across the funeral. We must rise. And I asked the Iranians, I said, what does that mean? We must rise. Is this the nation? Is this Islam? Is this Shia Islam? What is this? He said, well, it's got many, many meanings, multiple meanings. And this is another thing, is we expect things to be so literal in the West. When we see propaganda and messaging, it's usually a blunt
very
instrument.
Specific, yes.
There's much more nuance there. It can mean many things. Iraq and Iran, these are nations of poets. These are nations of artists, going back with 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 year civilizations. So yes, they said, it's the nation rising. We must rise against American global hegemony. The global South must rise. Islam must rise, or the Ummah must rise to do what's right, to defend the oppressed. And you start seeing these themes over and over again on every banner, and you realize, and T-shirts and flags on the buses, the same red and black, red and black. Very powerful iconography. Now, some people say, oh, that's state propaganda. The message is quite fluid.
And what was the underlying reason for them turning up? Of course, it's the funeral. Clearly, there was a connection with Ayatollah Khamenei. Was it a support of his political ideology, do you think, his spiritual direction, or was it an expression of opposition to the imperialist attacks? You know, the Minab children were killed, of course, that's emotional, 178 plus children. And of course, the way that his family, Ayatollah Khamenei, was killed. Was it an emotional reaction, or do you think there was also a kind of revolutionary resistance-based, logical, rational opposition to what was going on?
You know, I think it's probably all of those things. I mean, I was asked this question many times when I was there, because everyone wanted to know, me as an American, what did I see? What do I think with the supreme leader? Like, who is he to me? I was asked this by many Iranian TV channels and videographers and podcasters and things like that. This question came across a lot. And, when I'm from the West, I'm born and raised in America. I've worked and lived in Europe and the Middle East, as well as in Britain, of course. And I'm very fluent in different political systems. And in the West, we change our monarch every 4 years. And that's to give the appearance of democracy. That's not how, they do have a parliamentary system in Iran. They do. And it's a very sophisticated system. They have a council of experts who select the supreme leader. But that supreme leader has a direct connection with the people. And when you ask why, when people come out and this outpouring of emotion and support, where's that coming from? I can't begin to understand the relationship that many Iranians, I would say the majority of the country, have with their leader. I can't begin to even understand that, because then you're getting into the living memory of Iranians. So if you think about, he played a role pre-revolution in certain quarters, and then after the revolution, even more prominent politically, and then later, after the death of the Ayatollah Khamenei, he then steps into the supreme leader position. And at that point, that's something that no matter who you are, if what I said previously about the different hats, if you will, that the supreme leader wears, that means that he's going to be, it's a common thread of everybody living in Iran over those years. He's always there. He's always there. He's saying speeches on TV. He's giving advice. He is helping to get perspective. He's talking about important decisions the nation needs to make, changes in culture. And there's been some radical changes in Iran. I mean, especially in recent years, the removal of the mandatory hijab, for instance. That's a big thing socially, among other big changes. And then, of course, geopolitically, huge changes. And so he's been there through all of that. And so that's a common living memory for two generations, 37 years he was supreme leader. When he dies, that's also a common mourning as well. But it's coming with the backdrop of a war that's unprecedented.
Yeah.
And that's the change. The older generation could only describe to their younger children and grandchildren what the revolution was like, and they can only understand the revolutionary spirit in a kind of reflective way from their elders. But now they have seen the full force of the U.S. empire imposed on them. And you mentioned Minab School and all of these other humanitarian and massive tragedies, including, of course, the assassination of the country's head of state. You don't have to explain to the young generation what the relevance of the Islamic Revolution as an anti-hegemonic movement in the 70s. You don't have to explain to them. They know now. In fact, they know in a certain way with more clarity even than their forefathers knew, because it was all done through clandestine subterfuge, the 1953 coup, the overthrow of Mossadegh, the Shah's Savak secret police regime of secret courts, torture. I met many people who have family who've been killed, imprisoned, or abducted during that period. And then afterwards, sanctions, the assassination of nuclear scientists, the assassination of various other people by the US and Israel. That's all happening in financial warfare. All that's happening kind of a little bit under the surface for the average Iranian. Not anymore. The last 5 months have been a fundamental transformation, a paradigm shift in Iranian society as well as West Asia. And if you think about how important West Asia is as a geopolitical pivot, I would say that's a fundamental change in the global paradigm.
So that brings me on to lots of questions. In fact, there's so much to get through on this. I think that the whole show is going to end up focusing on really just unpacking what Iran is, but using Ayatollah Khamenei as the pivot for us to if you like, cover all the areas. So you can see that, and you referred a few times to him taking the baton on from Ayatollah Khamenei. And Ayatollah Khamenei, the father of the revolution, the visionary, the man who sacrificed everything to be able to liberate Iran. And it is a liberation from essentially a fascist imperialist dictatorship supported by the American imperialists, a leader who was narcissistic and to the extreme. He certainly made no bones about it. His view of women, etc., is all on record. I mean, he was quite a thing, the Shah of Iran. But when he fell, it was clearly a popular revolution, and there were winners and losers. There were people, for instance, in the Today Party, or those who were also part of the revolution, the socialist movements, etc., who didn't actually, in the end, take power. Power went to Ayatollah Khomeini because the people chose it. And then there was a referendum, and they chose a constitution which was based on Islam, on the Quran, on belief in God. And that clearly irks some people in the West to this day. Certainly a lot of that secular...
Not just in the West, in the Gulf as well.
So I'm just laying that foundation. But Ayatollah Khomeini took Iran through that and then saw through an 8-year war, the sacred defense, as it's known. And it's interesting that all of his period in power or leadership was spent really in a defense mode, trying to retain the gains of the revolution, as it were. And it cost a lot of blood, not in the initial revolution, but certainly with the MKO and the kind of the foreign-sponsored groups that were terrorizing the Iranian establishment and the people.
MKO or MEK as they're known.
MEK as they're known.
A terrorist organization.
Mujahideen-e-Khalq.
Yes.
But they blew up the parliament, assassinated President Beheshti at that time.
Killed many U.S. Servicemen as well, U.S. officials.
A fascinating sort of period. But after that turmoil, Ayatollah Khamenei comes in inheriting a nation that was pounded by the Iraqis, gassed by the Iraqis, military under Saddam, and pretty much in a bit of a wreck, if you like. And so he didn't take over some sort of rosy scenario. He came from the ashes. And then we see like around 3 or 4 decades of him being at the helm of you described. But I want to try to unpack the different elements that he contributed as a legacy, because now, if we start from now and go backwards, I could cite their advancement in Iran's advancement in nanotechnology. I could cite their advance in the fields of medicine, biochemical engineering, etc. You could go to the fields of military technology, nuclear physics, and in a long-winded way, I'm just trying to say, well, what is that legacy and how was it achieved by Ayatollah Khamenei in that period? That's a fascinating thing that most Westerners won't know about.
That's so true. It's really important that you mentioned the Iran-Iraq war, which I left that out of my post-revolution trouble and strife of the nation. That is so instructive, that war. It's so important, and that really shaped, I would say, the resilient attitude that Iranians, to know that that's what they would face, because everyone knew the world was backing Iraq. The world, no one was supporting Iran, but the world seemed to be backing Iraq to destroy their country. So I think that set them on the path, in terms of their national defense, and to where they are now, to the point where they have advanced in the area of missiles and avionics to such an extent that they now can not only defend themselves, but exert geopolitical leverage, which is extraordinary. Then you're getting into now the turning of the tables. But back to the legacy of the supreme leader, you have to remember, this is pre-revolution. What was the literacy rate of women in Iran? It's not that long ago.
No.
1979, 1980. And look at what it is now. The level of postgraduate PhDs in STEMs of women in Iran, they're probably, I would say, easily producing more than the entire region in a year.
Wow.
Just Iran in that department, and would probably per capita be miles ahead of the United States. Okay, per capita. So the education of women, and this is something that the Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, that was one of his main directives. He said, education, and they delivered. They delivered on this, and that, if you think about it, what is so threatening about Iran? And it's to amass all the forces against it in the region. It has to be construed as a threat, not only to Israel, okay, but to the Gulf states. And if you think about, if a country like, and Egypt is a good example too, because Egypt, from a human resource point of view, is a big country. You're talking about, I don't know what the population of Egypt is, but it's 100 million plus. I'm not sure what it is. It's a significant country, Arab nationalist country, now a military dictatorship, so kind of subdued. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. So I'm talking about all the Arab republics, looking at the colors of the flags, red, white, black.
They're all the same.
Iraq as well. And Iran falls into that category, although it's not Middle East, but we'll call it broadly West Asia now. And so what from a human capital point of view, you go to most Middle Eastern countries or West Asian countries, and they import all of their labor. They import their management, the European middle management, quite a lot of Palestinian management as well, if you're in the Gulf, which is interesting. That's another high-performing academic culture, Palestine, and exports their high-performing academic brain power to the rest of the region and globally. A lot of people aren't aware of that as well. Israel's been dismantling that.
Yeah, scholasticide has been going on in Palestine.
And so Iran, that's a threat. And if you look at the targeting by Israel and the U.S. against Iranian universities and schools, I mean, you're talking, it's in the hundreds easily, the amount of targets that have been hit. Sharif University, I was at in Tehran, that was one of the main targets. Their engineering department, their AI department was destroyed by the U.S. and Israel. That's part of the dismantling of the intellectual foundation, the science and math foundation, because they're a threat to the Gulf. They're a threat because how can you compete? And you'd often hear this complaint from Israelis who relied for years on Palestinian migrant labor. And all these Israeli businesses were totally reliant on not just Palestinian migrant labor, but Palestinian management of that labor, you see.
Right.
So if Israel had to compete with Palestine over the markets and resources in the Levant, who's going to win?
Palestinians.
Of course. And demographically, they're going to outnumber them as well. The same with Iran. Who's going to compete with Iran? So far ahead are they in domestic, organic, science and technology, academia, women's achievements, they're miles ahead of everybody, even Lebanon and Egypt and so forth.
So that knowledge economy is a major reason for, say, Israel's nervousness of, how can it achieve greater Israel when you have a knowledge economy creating technology, making economic sort of advances, making scientific advances. If that's your competitor in West Asia, it means you can't dominate.
That's what the Abraham Accords were about. It was about allowing for Israel to colonize the Gulf Arab states with its Israeli knowledge economy subsidized by the United States. Because it would go the other direction. I mean, you already have areas of the Middle East that are nominally, historically, part of greater Iran, if you will. I'm talking about Bahrain, parts of Arabia. So the influence is already strong. The UAE, the Emirates is an example. And those are all very specific targets of the Abraham Accords.
I see.
Making them dependent on Israeli technology, Israeli businesses, U.S. businesses by extension. So that's kind of another form of colonization. So it's not only that, beyond that, it's the fact that Iran is the only country, and a woeful realization is that none of the Arab Gulf states, maybe Qatar to a degree with Al Jazeera's position on Palestine and Gaza, being exemplary in many ways, their coverage of those issues.
Yes.
Aside from that, though, and the hosting of Hamas political wing in Doha, allowing it to sort of still exist and try to negotiate, who else is standing up for the Palestinians or the people in Lebanon? Nobody. Nobody. Who's willing to actually put it on the line for them? Nobody but Iran. And that's the difference. That's the difference. And in a way, it kind of puts a lot of the Gulf Arab monarchies to shame in a certain way. And it also differentiates Iran. And I would say, and I think it's undeniable, you look at the popularity just in the global ummah, the respect that Iran has acquired in the last year, all Muslims, not just Shiite, not just Sunni, no, not specific.
By standing up to Israel and the US.
For doing what's right. And sometimes that's what it takes. It will take one country. And so even people I know, it doesn't matter what sect of Islam that they prescribe to, they recognize that they're standing up for what's right, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is and take the hit for everybody else. I mean, that's a powerful message. Iran has now, they've shown this. They've shown this to the world, to themselves, but to the region and the world. And I don't think the story can go back to where it was before.
Well, continuing with the legacy, you talked about that relationship with allies in the region, the oppressed, what Ayatollah Khamenei called the mustazifun, and what Ayatollah Khamenei made a kind of firm cornerstone of his foreign policy. You could argue that the Western use of Saddam in attacking Iran in those first years gave Iran a mindset of launching asymmetric warfare away from their territories, because they had been attacked, their sovereignty had been violated, millions had died. So the natural reaction was, how do we defend against this? Well, of course, any good strategist would say, well, can we take the fight to our enemies? So the existential enemy was, of course, Israel. And you could argue that other than, say, an ethical or moral obligation to support the Palestinians or any of the oppressed in that region, there was also a geostrategic, geomilitary, geopolitical reasoning to say, do we want to fight this war in our own territory, or would we rather take the war to the enemy? And from that round, the Ayatollah Khamenei quite steadfastly seemed to pursue that line, evidence being most of the axis of resistance and his support of that. The West calls that terrorism.
Through proxies.
Through proxies.
Yeah.
They don't call them allies.
Yeah.
What's your take on that part of his legacy and his support of the region? What were his motivations?
I think this is different ways you can look at this. Okay, but whatever theories we might have had are put to rest now, because what happened in Damascus in November and December of 2024 put all speculation to rest about what the bigger grand chessboard was about and why Iran were so interested and insistent on making sure that the Syrian government does not collapse and that the Syrian state does not collapse, because they knew what would happen. This would create a corridor, because Iran was well aware of the geopolitical games in the region, further back even than the American empire. We're talking about British empire. The effective partitioning of Iraq. This goes much unnoticed, but this is one of the legacies of the first Gulf War. The fabled no-fly zone created almost the de facto establishment of Iraqi Kurdistan as a kind of autonomous region in Iraq, and that was such an important geopolitical achievement for the West and for Israel. Splitting Iraq effectively, then using Iraqi Kurdistan in the north of Iraq to have clandestine bases, to build an intelligence network, to use as a military launching pad against Iran. And not only that, the corridor from Syria, from the Golan Heights through Sweda, linking up to Kurdish-held areas in the northeast, connecting with Iraqi Kurdistan, what some might call David's corridor, via Al-Tanf and through there, the destabilization of the Iraqi-Syrian border using ISIS for this very reason, so that you could not have cooperation and trade or military cooperation or supplying of electricity between Iran, Iraq, and Syria and Lebanon. And some might call that the Shiite arc, whatever. That's some Western commentators are calling it that. I think it's much more fundamental. You're talking about a potential common market from the Mediterranean to Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yeah.
And so Israel and the United States if you look at every single move they've made, especially with backing the dirty war in Syria, the Iraq War, the partitioning of Iraq effectively, is all for this reason. It's to divide what could be a very prosperous belt, and these countries would reinforce each other against economic attacks and deprivation and sanctions by being able to trade over land borders. Right. That can't happen. So then it starts to make sense. And Iraq is probably the greatest tragedy of all. Not merely because of the war that happened, but because of the legacy of the war. What happened after the Iraq War is that the United States set up the new Iraqi economy, which is totally controlled by the United States, where you have effectively Iraqi oil revenues. What you could describe as their sovereign wealth is in New York, and the United States can turn off the tap at any moment. So Iraq...
So all that oil wealth which gets sold, it goes straight to U.S. banks?
Well, it's handled in dollars, and much of it via the United States, via New York, via U.S. banks. And so there's mechanisms. Really, the U.S. Treasury has ultimate control over them. So if Iraq drifts too far, a Shiite-dominated Iraq drifts too far off the reservation for America's liking,
cut the money supply.
And that's a big threat. That's the ultimate sword of Damocles hanging over the Iraqis' neck. And this is why they haven't fully evicted the U.S. military presence from the region. This is why they haven't wrestled control over the sort of rogue entities running amok in Iraqi Kurdistan,
right?
And who are really creating problems for the region. And it's also why the Islamic Republic in Iraq still have, like for instance, the Iraqi government can't say we're closing airspace. No American planes, no Israeli planes. They even found a secret Israeli base hidden in the Iraqi desert. I mean, unbelievable. So you have these issues that are lingering as legacies of the Iraq War, as the Americans have created a matrix of control in the region, using the dollar as the main mechanism, not military, but the dollar is the main mechanism of control. The military is merely there to back that up.
Right.
I would say that's true globally, but it's really, really clear. And now Iran is shattered. They've shattered this matrix into, it's broken now. All these U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf, or many of them have been kind of left, abandoned, inoperable. Maybe the U.S. still holds the lease to them. They still have possibly some equipment and personnel there, but they're not being used in many cases to launch attacks, and they're not operable militarily. So this is a huge change geopolitically right now. In the last 6 months, just in the last 6 months, the U.S. is no longer a superpower in the region.
Well, that's partly because, again, arguably the foresight of Ayatollah Khamenei and his steering of Iran towards something which a lot of the other anti-imperialist forces that have been and gone, and some are still around, have failed to do on the level that Iran is. And that is the militarization, the power expressions.
And self-sufficiency.
Okay.
That was a big message of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to produce.
And how successful would you say he is in both those, or self-sufficiency and military deterrence or power?
Well, self-sufficiency, very successful. Internal industries, import replacement, sanctions-busting, as they call it. Iran has been incredible. Not reliant on, homegrown nuclear physics, power, energy, homegrown missile, homegrown drone programs, unbelievable, unbelievably successful. Pharmaceuticals, look at all the factories the U.S. were targeting. And, so agriculture, they're food self-sufficient, they're technology self-sufficient, they're energy self-sufficient on multiple levels, not just petroleum and gas, but nuclear power as well. And they could probably be world leaders in probably a dozen other categories if they weren't under such a strict economic embargo.
So legacy-wise, again, I saw at the funeral over 100 international leaders or their delegations or their representatives, nations represented. That was significant because Iran was supposed to be isolated. US policy in terms of those economic sanctions was also political sanctioning. And it was like, yet still now what we're still seeing is these leaders sent their people. They sent their top-line people, basically. And from a legacy point of view, isolating Iran would be, I think, seen to be a failure as a result. Iran's capability to continue trading, through whatever means, cryptocurrencies, etc., still seems to be intact. And this link with China and Russia, there are strategic agreements. There are how extensive they are, I don't know, but the defense agreements. There are economic agreements. So, has the US failed really? Has Ayatollah Khamenei's legacy essentially defeated American efforts to essentially destroy Iran?
I think the international community, like the West like to call it the international community, which is really the G7, 7 countries.
Yeah.
From a Western point of view, that's the international, that's Western values. It's the G7. That's it. There's a whole big, wide world outside of the G7. Now, the U.S. and Israel would like to wrestle control of South America, and they're in the process of doing that politically. But they can't do that for the entire globe. So in terms of isolating Iran, just the Saudi delegation alone is, to me, that would be viewed as a 5-alarm fire in the West. And I think it was by the U.S. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I believe from behind closed doors, the United States has been applying significant pressure on Saudi Arabia to attack Yemen in recent weeks. And brought that theater back after an effective ceasefire since 2022. Yeah. So, but that's just an example. The isolation is a failure in the same way that it was a failure to isolate Russia. Because you can't, these are not, look at these countries in the Middle East. They're all basically products of the Sykes-Picot post-World War I map-making exercise, including all of these tribal sheikdoms, or these petroleum monarchies. These are artifacts of the British Empire. And so you can't isolate a civilizational state. You can't isolate. Russia is a bona fide civilizational state. So is Iran. So is India. And I can give you a half a dozen others. You can't do that. And they have relationships. They have links. They have trade links, cultural links, historical links, literary links, links that are so enmeshed in history and the past, present, and future. It's insane from a Western point of view. All they're doing is accelerating the development of BRICS, alternative economies, alternative payment rails, alternative diplomatic channels, alternative institutions to the Western-founded institutions. That's all they're doing. They're accelerating, I think, an alternative parallel international system by insisting that they have total submission from all of these former colonial subjects or protectorates or whatnot. And Iran is probably one of the most, Defiance is probably the one characteristic that, but see, in the West, people wouldn't necessarily class Iran as just so defiant, because Iran's also, I think, strategic patience is also one of their defining characteristics. And like Russia is very defiant, but very strategically patient. So are the Chinese. But Iran is extremely patient. And if you look at the defense that they have, the fortifications they've built up over 50 years for the express absolute intent of dealing with a 21st century asymmetric fight and disposing with large conventional parts of the military that they know would be eliminated because of the advent of satellite reconnaissance and U.S. air power. How else could you defend yourself? And it seems like the Iranians have come up with a solution to that, and that's rocked the world, to be honest.
Well, the aerospace industry, Iran has satellites up now. That's another sign of the legacy of Ayatollah Khamenei in terms of the knowledge economy and the drive for independence. And there's also, of course, their successes in terms of the social and the ethical, moral side of it. Because I think he didn't order this nuclear bomb to be made when he probably could have. And so
he issued a fatwa prohibiting the development of nuclear weapons. So ironic that they assassinated him.
So mass murder is off the agenda as far as Iranians are concerned. Not so necessarily true for Israel and the Anglo-Saxons.
There's a religious rationale in that position as well.
So from that point of view, there is a bar that Iran is raising. There's a standard it's standing up for in terms of like even the morality of war. And so that's interesting. But could that change? Because now, in conclusion, I'm going to have to take it full circle back to your engagements, interactions with Iranian people on the ground during that funeral, and the sense that you got of the future. So I began by saying the king is dead, long live the king. And literally what you got is you got a Sayyid Khamenei replacing a Sayyid Khamenei. You got the son of Sayyid Ali Khamenei being replaced by Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei. That in itself was quite symbolic of continuity, of stability, and of something deeper, because the political system is another legacy and a success of Sayyid Ali Khamenei, arguably, insofar as it's not relying on individual characters, not a personality necessarily, although the personality was very important. It seems now that systemically Iran is capable of taking 175 leaders, being commanders, being knocked out, assassinated by the Israelis. Its supreme leader being killed, knocked out, and yet the system survives. And the military responded very rapidly to both the first attack by Israel and then the Ramadan war as well. That can't have happened if it was relying on just a top tier of leadership. There's something deeper. There's a strategic depth to the political system and the leadership, which seems to be a legacy we ought to analyze.
This is a very good point. So much like we were talking about how the actions of the West have accelerated the development of BRICS and and made it a priority, in fact, an urgency to get off of the US dollar system. By the same token, these attacks, the assassination, the martyrdom of the supreme leader has crystallized the Iranian system and all of these various assassinations, these are so-called decapitation strikes. In the early days of February 28th, 29th, as an example, and also during the so-called 12-day war over a year ago, these have crystallized that system less reliant on personalities, and it's created a resilience of the system to people to realize that we've all got to be on the same page. We all have to share the burden of leadership. We have to have leaders at every level of the system as well, not relying on totems and personalities and so forth. And so then it really comes down to the essence. What is the content of the leader's speech, not just from the personality. Although Sayyid Ali Khamenei had a massive personality because he was leader for so long, it's natural that would be the case. But now coming into and this is kind of proven now. And how is it proven? The son of the leader, who is now the supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, he hasn't shown his face in public. Why is that? The minute he puts his head above the parapet, there's a massive target on him, and the U.S. and Israel will prioritize his assassination. There's no question about that. So it's defied all, but the West have said, oh, we've taken out the leader, and they keep saying that the Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, he's not even alive, and that he's so deformed he can't show his face in public, and that he's probably dead or whatever. There's all sorts of other derogatory things that they pushed out about him as well. What's interesting, that hasn't deterred the Iranian people. And I saw that. That's one thing I did saw that kind of surprised me. Everyone was hoping that he would come to Mashhad at the shrine of the Imam Reza and make a surprise statement. And the people in the back of their minds were hoping that this would happen, and it would really just motivate and capture the moment for the people. It didn't happen, but that doesn't minimize anything at all. And so really, all of this is happening because of pressure from outside. So I will say this, and this is probably the biggest takeaway, that Donald Trump and the Americans and the Israelis and Netanyahu have single-handedly dismantled any Iranian opposition to the government, to the system there, any Western, pro-Western leaning, Western liberal. They have done a very good job at pretty much, with their actions, what they have done to Iran, in wiping out any opposition for the foreseeable future. They've done that. That is the sole achievement of Trump.
Well, that
and the Israelis.
That and closing down the Hormuz and creating an entire economic disaster for all of us. Perhaps.
And potentially alienating all the U.S. allies, former allies in the region as well. So it is really, the blowback is just, from the Western largesse, is just epic, really, if you look at it that way. So you can complain all you want about the Iranians and their system, and they'll just do that to no end in Washington, and make all these claims about Iran, but everything they have done has legitimized, strengthened, and have probably breathed new life into the Islamic Revolution for at least the next half century.
I can't help but feel that Sayyid Khamenei not going into the bunkers, when he was clearly being told by his folk, partly was an act of bravery and courage, but he modeled himself, as you said it right at the beginning, on the life of the sacred role models of Islam, the Ahlul Bayt, so Imam Hussein being primary in this. And Imam Hussein had his children and family wiped out on the plains of Karbala. We know this. We've seen that he was brave and courageous, even though he knew what his fate was. He still went and did what he did. There's a little bit of kind of almost a poetic angle to this, where Ayatollah Khamenei could well have been thinking, I mean, I'm speculating, but he could well have been thinking, my sacrifice will achieve this. That almost like the embracing of the martyrdom was his success, his greatest success. And that in martyrdom and in death, he poses an even bigger problem. And you've talked about it in terms of reviving the revolution. And he talked about it in terms of the second phase of the...
I would say reinvigorating.
Okay, reinvigorating, yes.
Reinvigorating.
Yeah, more accurate. And in terms of the second phase of the revolution, and where, say, Mojtaba Husseini, who is a manifestation of that second phase of the revolution, he's not necessarily going to abide by the fact that they're not going to make a nuclear weapon. He hasn't stopped the Hormuz being shut down. He's not been deferential towards sanctioning the world because Iran is being sanctioned. He's clearly has got anger and revenge on his mind, because he said that in one of his recent speeches, and he's if you like, mirroring the people's feeling on that.
Exactly.
So the legacy, in part, is this kind of attack on the great Satan, which was Sayyid Khamenei and Sayyid Khomeini's kind of line. He seems to be
the great Satan being America.
America.
The little Satan being Israel.
Israel now. It used to be, I think, Britain came in the equation somewhere, but I think it's Israel.
They said America's the great Satan, Israel's the little Satan, and Britain's the hidden Satan.
Is that the... Okay, that clarifies that one.
One person said that to me as a side note. I think he was saying that in jest, but who knows?
Yeah. So this legacy and the second phase of the revolution, led by his son, and with a harder line, and one which will build on the base which Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has made, seems to be the stuff of nightmares for neoconservatives, for Zionists, for imperialists. And do you think that they will achieve the successes or the targets of that second phase that they'd set? And amongst this was the living by the character of Imam Hussein. It was the idea of a morally upright society, an ethical society. Because he said Iran hasn't arrived at what he thinks is an Islamic society yet. Yeah. And an Islamic society would be one which was mirroring, say, the Prophet for his 10 years in Medina. It's the fact that it's not arrived there is because he knows there was still corruption. There were still people who have got a lot of neoliberal ideas, are still imperialist mentality. Many are money-orientated folk. Many haven't understood what the idea of a kind of a giving, sacrificing, just state might be. So there's work to be done. But the fact that they've all been galvanized sounds to me like, say, Mojtaba Husseini has got all the groundwork to be able to achieve what Sayyid Ali Khamenei perhaps wanted in the future.
Absolutely. The assassination of the supreme leader and his family, ruthless and brutal. Imagine, your daughters, your son-in-laws, your grandchildren, children. It's brutal and ruthless. The Americans and the Israelis have made the argument for the hardliners. They've made the argument for the hardliners. And they made the argument for Iran having a nuclear deterrent more than anything. And what was extraordinary was when we're out on the street in Tehran and being approached by lots of people. You're out there with millions of people on the street, and they know straight away. They see my badge, little flag on it, my ID, and they see my face. They know I'm a Westerner, and so a lot of people coming up to me, you could see very clearly just from their dress and demeanor that maybe they're not from the heavily religious part of society. And these are people that would have been out for the Green Revolution against the government in 2009.
Sure.
Okay, maybe even protesting against the government in December, in January. But now they are more hawkish than Pezeskian.
Yeah.
And the Galibaf, more hawkish. They're demanding no negotiations they're chanting out in the streets 2 weeks ago, Arachi, Galibaf, no more negotiating with the Americans in Farsi. It's translated to me. You could hear the chants. I mean, and it was right across.
Loud and clear.
Loud and clear. So these are people who used to be moderates or Western-leaning liberals are now hawks.
Right.
And they're pressuring the government. They're putting pressure because they're becoming, maybe they've had an epiphany, or maybe they were just always impatient So their impatience has been transferred to an anti-American and anti-imperialist patience because they can see, they don't like having bombs dropped on top of them and seeing their children slaughtered. I mean, kind of basic human values there. So that's also part of it. So again, it's the part of that pattern we said, it's everything being done to Iran is changing and transforming and accelerating everything the West claimed to decry about Iran. But it's changing not in a way that I think in the demonization of Iran likes to characterize it, but I think it's just making it into, I think, a more, there's a lot more moral clarity on these issues, and these arguments about anti-hegemonic arguments, anti-colonial arguments, they've actually taken firm root beyond theoretical and into practical, and that informs the new geopolitical position of Iran in West Asia and globally. And that's, listen, no country on the planet, the Russians have not taken a full American military hit. Neither have the Chinese. No. Nobody has. Nobody has. Nobody has and are still standing on their feet, okay? Iran has. So you have to remember when the Iranian foreign minister and their president and possibly their leader goes to interface with Chinese, a superpower. China is a superpower. Russia is a superpower. Nuclear superpower. They're facing these leaders. They themselves have been through, they have walked through the ring of fire as a country. And the Chinese haven't. Not against America and Israel. Israel is a powerful conventional military. Very powerful. And armed and back to the tooth.
That gives them huge kudos.
Well, that and America. Iran's not only standing on their feet after all this, they've reversed the leverage in the region. They're dictating terms on South Lebanon and other places. That's extraordinary. In 6 months? That happened in 6 months. We will look back, if we survive as a human race, we will look back at this year, this period, as a transformational moment, I believe. It's not over yet, obviously. This is, I personally think this is the phase 1 and 2 of a long, drawn-out, messy, possibly very violent conflict in the region. I'm under no illusions about how long this is going to take to unpack and unravel, but this is extraordinary what we have seen.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for an absolutely fascinating journey through the makeup of Iran, the legacy of Ayatollah Khamenei, and your eyewitness accounts of what you've seen out there. It's a rare voice that I think people, certainly around the world, will relish the opportunity to delve into during this video. And thank you for watching this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective. Iran seems inexorably heading towards becoming the fourth center of power. It hasn't even exercised its chokehold on the Bab el-Mandeb, which is the access point through the Red Sea, which the whole of the trade routes for merchant ships added to the Hormuz that it's already throttled. These are impacts that are going to happen to all of us in terms of the effects. The bread on our supermarkets will become scarce potentially. The oil is going to become more expensive. Everything will become more expensive. Iran cannot be ignored. And it seems that the Zionist Western Empire is hell-bent on making us all suffer for their hubris, for their paranoia, for their desperation to bring Iran to heel, to make it bend the knee. That isn't going to happen as far as I can see, and I tend to agree with Patrick that we're in for a long, drawn-out struggle which will eventually hit all of us. It's hitting us already, but sadly, I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. We pray it doesn't. We hope for peace, and we hope for justice to emerge, because peace cannot really be real without justice. And that requires the whole world, the international community, the real international community, to gather together and I think take the lead of Iran to defy the kind of the imperialism and the kind of totalitarian states that are emerging, the new techno-fascism that's emerging. And that's where I think the unity is required. It means crossing the boundaries of color, creed, culture, religion, ethnicity. This is nothing to do with any of those things. It's to do with the dignity of humanity and for a civilization that we control, not the technocratic or the feudalists, who are the neo-feudalists that are emerging. Thank you for watching this edition. Thank you again, Patrick. Do tune into Patrick's 21st Century Wire. Lots of great information there, and do sign up, subscribe, and support his channel. Another independent voice that requires your support, just as Deep Dive Perspective does. Do like, share, subscribe to our channels. We need your support. We get censored, banned all the time, and it's only your backup that will allow us to continue bringing you these kinds of real truth narratives. Goodbye.